Today, we'll head to Ecuador, hear from our colleagues from Indonesia and the Philippines. Our format is simple. Each of three scholars will make a 7-minute presentation, followed by a 5-minute Q&A individually. Now, we'll have time for 3 or 4 questions. If you'd like to ask one, submit it to the chat room, and I'll read it. That saves us having to go back and forth with video and audio. Now, if we don't get to your question, you can email the speaker yourself. Also, if you would do us the kind favor of muting your audio now, that would really help. 2 years ago, we had a barking dog, and among 50 listeners, we couldn't figure out who it was. And if you're doing this for course credit, specifically from the Dials Center, take down this code. UF Speech and Debate is number 1. UF Speech and Debate is number 1, and hand it in to your professor for your 10 extra credit points. Our first speaker is Syarifah Al Athas, a second-year PhD student here at UF in our College of Design, Construction, and Planning. She is studying building information modeling, computer and algorithm-assisted design, and sustainability practices. It just so happens that Indonesia's construction industry is ramping up to build a new capital city in Borneo called Nusantara to replace Jakarta, which is sinking. Her talk today will cover her work on integrating communal resource management, local craftsmanship, and indigenous knowledge in a uniquely Indonesian way of promoting sustainability in architecture, engineering, and construction. Now, I do speak a little Bahasa Indonesia, so waktu bermula dan sila beritahu informasi, and that means time to start. Please tell us your information.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Ed. I'll start my presentation. So it's a very kind introduction. Very nice to see you all in this Zoom meetings. So as Dr. Ed introduced myself, I'm Syarifah Al Athas. You can call me Syarifah. And I will present Code Meets Culture, Building Indonesia's Sustainability for Tomorrow. I will present about how Fulbright empowered a research unit of my own. And then I'm excited to share how my Fulbright supported research explores the intersections of digital technology and cultural heritage in Indonesia's construction industry. So basically, Indonesia is at the crossroads. So Indonesia is one of Asia's largest construction markets that is advancing fast with AI and BIM, building information modeling. The BIM itself has already been implemented in Indonesia's construction industry since 2018. So it's already been 7 years now, but the progress is not fulfilling for Indonesian. That is to apply a smart blueprint that supports a building's entire life cycle from concept to demolition. So we're facing the facts that Indonesia is in big 5 construction market in Asia, and then Indonesia has robust culture and tradition, and Indonesia too has severe environmental degradation. So, but the challenge lies in ensuring that this tech revolution aligns with sustainable and culturally respectful growth. Oh, I forgot to mention before that Indonesia is very populous country. We have almost 300 millions people in Indonesia, living in Indonesia. So yeah, as Dr. Ed said before, that Jakarta is sinking now, so we have to move our capital city to Borneo, Kalimantan. And then next, about the digital innovation in construction, we've already know that AI is developing everywhere internationally. So AI and BIM, or building information modeling, are transforming how we design, manage, and maintain public buildings. And boosting cost efficiency and then performance and environmental tracking. But other than that, are they adaptable to Indonesia's unique cultural context? Or is it safe environmentally? Is it safe culturally to have that kind of high tech implemented in Indonesia's robust culture? So talking about that, we've already know the problem, and we have to know about the power of tradition in Indonesia. Indonesia's traditions offer sustainable practices that can enrich modern frameworks. Indonesia's traditional values of theses that can enrich modern frameworks. We've already know millions of genius loci or local genius that Indonesian have, that it is already coded. I've already coded that to make sure that it can be implemented in higher technology, and specifically in AI, in small language modeling. Other than that, digitally we know the problem about digitally advanced and socially grounded area in Indonesia in construction industry. So my core inquiry is that how can cultural insights be embedded into AI BIM models to create a hybrid system, digitally advanced yet environmentally and socially grounded. It might be very utopist for some of us, especially for them who works in construction industry, but yeah, there's nothing impossible in this world. So I'm trying to do that in my research. So it's still progressing. It's my 20th month's journey in Fulbright in this doctoral program. So I'm still progressing in that. So that's about how the review, semi-structured interviews with local experts and case studies, including those from Indonesia's new capital projects, as Dr. Ed said, and as I mentioned before. And it's basically how we remodeled the BIM with the input of AI, with the input of knowledgeable cultural things that Indonesia have, 4,000 of the tribes and everything. So talking about the Indonesia's new capital city in Kalimantan or Borneo, Indonesia, the capital development offers a blank yet culturally robust and rich canvas. We've already know that. Integrating local ecological knowledge into building information mind, lighting, and spatial comfort. Also, the overall development of the environment. This is only the theory. The practical way in BIM implementation is not that beautiful enough to be said. It is still in progress. That's why we need more to do with AI. So I tried to make a model about cultural AI BIM hybrid model. So I developed a prototype building information modeling workflow in AI that integrating cultural data layers that we've already known before, many of them, millions of them, like material heritage zones, vernacular form logic, and communal activity patterns into a parametric design processes. It is still a trial, it is still experimental, but I'm rooting for this process, and I hope you're supporting this idea. And then the next thing is that this isn't just about Indonesia. It's globally implemented. This research invites a broader conversation. How can we ensure artificial intelligence and enhanced development doesn't erase local identities, but amplifies them? How to ethically implement millions of possibilities while maintaining the genius loci or local genius of the context of the development side. I think that's a big question in construction industry, especially for us architect and for architecture educator. Talking about Fulbright's impact in my research, my Fulbright grant gave me the access to education in UF, networks, and time to dive into the intersection of tech and tradition through the enrolled courses, conferences, and workshops, connecting with thought leaders, and then visiting sites of LED certified buildings in UF. I just know that UF is one of the biggest LED certified buildings in US, so I'm very proud to be a student in UF. As presidents of sustainable construction and collecting ground level data. So far, in almost 20 months of my Fulbright journey in the US, I have presented on 5 poster presentations, and I will be presenting on 1 conference paper next May. And I gained inputs and then learning many things academically from colleagues and experts to develop my research. So it's a never-ending journey for now, but it's progressing, and I'm glad to be one of Fulbrighter. And then last but not least, I would say terima kasih. Thank you to Fulbright, to my research mentors, Dr. Nawari, and the communities, especially colleagues Fulbrighters in North Florida, uh, who generously shared their stories. And then I hope there will be many, many more Syarifah who will be developing their research, fulfilling her dream to bring the idea of peace and sustainable development. Thank you very much. Back to Dr. Ed.
The only problem with these online meetings is that you don't hear the tumultuous applause. Uh, do we have any questions? I'm looking at the chat room. Um, I don't see, but of course I have many questions. You mentioned Nusantara, the new capital city that's under construction. And I was just reading an article in the New York Times, and I would suggest everybody go on to the New York Times and just put in Nusantara, and the article will come up and it'll give you a complete overview of exactly what's planned and how they're coming along. With Nusantara, how far along is that project?
Okay, so basically, politically, it is being enhanced by the new political stance, but the progress is almost at 80%. They said that in 2026 it will be operated, but it's already 7 years in the BIM implementation, but there's nothing to do with BIM and sustainability yet. I mean, we know Borneo, we know Kalimantan that it's very rich in environmental diversity, but then there's a big development there. I understand that there's no there's no simulation whatsoever to know how catastrophic this will to the environmental impact for Kalimantan. So yeah, it's still in progress, but 80%. They say that's 80%.
Good. It's a fascinating project. And when you look at the New York Times article,
Mhm.
Katie asks, I'm curious about the kinds of local materials being proposed for Nusantara and if the project has received any preliminary feedback from communities.
Indeed. Yeah, actually the local craftsmanship doesn't been implemented yet. And furthermore, the local materials, that's why I called that not many of the idea of local genius is applied in that projects right now. But the BIM, the building information modeling things and how we construct things, that's something developed throughout the years, in maybe in 5 decades, 10 decades, so that I believe that building itself, it's living things. So in the process, I'd like to have like evaluation on their cycle of construction from its planning to designing up to the demolition and the usage and of course the demolition. So it's a long process, and I believe that there's a hope in there in applying the sustainability,
Very
more
good.
sustainable that one. Thank you.
Uh, our colleague Jerome asks, how do you see the integration of cultural data in these models with the rapidly changing cultural dynamics?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. I believe that cultural is actually very fluid, but for Indonesia, there are many records of tribes and the cultural things, cultural records. So I believe that I have to take some of them. I know. The thing with computation is that it is very mathematical, right? We generate something that is um, maybe just 20% of the all of the cultural things, all the cultural values that we have. But I think that is better than not implementing at all. So me and my colleagues and my professor trying to have better understanding to generate that kind of code, quote unquote code, so that so that yeah, I believe it will be less than 50% of the cultural, all of the 100% cultural value, but it's better than nothing.
Good. I'm hoping you'll record your results now and then every year update them and report back to us on your return here
Of
to
course. Thank you so
Gainesville.
much. That's
Good.
what I'm trying to do. Thank you, Dr. Ed.
Okay. I do have to make one correction. I said that Yogyakarta is on the northern tip. No, Jakarta is on the northern tip. Yogyakarta is south central. And
Uh-huh.
in 1998, I flew into Jakarta just after the revolution with some colleagues and my family. We took a 16-hour van ride from Jakarta to Yogyakarta in the middle of the night during the World Cup soccer tournament. It was one of the fantastic weeks of my life, and I would suggest that you add this to your bucket list. It's a royal province on the southern end of the island, famed for its batik painting schools and the neighboring temple of Borobudur and Mount Merapi, an active volcano, and just fascinating. Ooh, one last question from Carlos. How different is the culture in Borneo than Java, and how do you juggle this?
Awesome. Thank you, Carlos, for questioning. Out of 14,000 of tribes, Borneo and Java is very different. I mean, like it's almost like the coastal ones and the forestry ones. So it's very different. It's from 0 to 10. It's 10. The differences. But what I'm trying to say is that I'm trying to take it as a local, most local thing applicable for Borneo, so that the one thing that is implemented in the project for Nusantara is the Borneo ones, not Java ones. So I'm trying to make that kind of approach. But then when this model apply to other part of Indonesia or maybe other part in the world, it can apply different region or different local genius. So it's yeah.
Good. I should mention that Kalimantan, which is the Indonesian part of Borneo, along with two Malaysian provinces and the oil sultanate of Brunei, it's one of the most ethnically diverse populations on the planet, second only, I think, to Papua New Guinea. You know, with all sorts of tribes, sub-tribes, sub-clans. It's just absolutely fascinating. Great. Well, thank you very much, Syarifah. We wish you
Thank
well
you.
for this Ramadan season and keep in touch with us.
Of course. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much. Okay. Uh, our second speaker is Dr. Kathleen Colverson. She is an associate research scientist in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. Her work around the world in gender and participatory development, especially with smallholder agriculture, has been her focus for the past 25 years. Today, we're privileged to hear about the importance of addressing equity in household nutrition in Ecuador. Dr. Colverson, we await your information. I will
Great.
not. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Ed. Let me go ahead and I'll share my screen here real quick. Make sure everybody can see. And hopefully that is available to everybody. All right, very good. Excellent. Let me go ahead and make sure we've got this. Okay, super. Well, welcome to everyone that has joined us today, and thanks so much for considering putting Fulbright into your life. It was certainly something that I enjoyed very much when I had the opportunity to do this. I'm going to talk a little bit about some work that I did in Ecuador in 2022, but I also should mention that for those of you who might have sensitive ears, some of the words I'm going to be using I think are currently banned, so you might want to plug your ears when I mention these things. But I am, as Ed mentioned, an associate research scientist in agriculture. I actually am based in the animal sciences department, as that is my original background. So look forward to sharing a little bit of the work that I did in Ecuador. Let me give you a little background first as to why this is an important topic, because a lot of times people will ask me, who cares and why does this matter? And I should mention that there are numerous overlapping linkages between agriculture, health, and nutrition. My specialty happens to be livestock, but I also do a lot of work in other kinds of agricultural systems, in nutrition, food safety, et cetera, because they all have a gender component to them. And one of the most important things to consider when we think about social systems is looking at what we call the gender division of labor, which influences the amount of time that women have to not only care for themselves, but their children. And essentially, when I do work in the countries in the world that I've worked in, we are looking primarily at rural, traditional populations. And in these instances, in most cases, the woman is involved in what we would call the private sphere, where she's predominantly associated with the home and domestic activities, and the man is predominantly associated with the public sphere, which is more associated with formal income generation. So this has a real tremendous influence on not only their ability to, the women's ability to work, but also their ability to consume high quality foods. One of the things I focused on for about the past 10 years now is what we call the inter-household allocation of food, which basically means how is food distributed in a family, who gets what as far as quantity and who gets what as far as quality of food. And we're particularly interested in this as it relates to pregnant and lactating women and young children under 5, because there is a tremendous amount of influence on the intergenerational effects that if a young woman does not receive adequate nutrition when she's growing up, and then she becomes pregnant and lactates, and she is not able to pass on adequate nutrition to her child, we develop what's called a poverty cycle associated not only with gender, but associated with nutrition and outcomes as they mature. Women also have limited ability to make decisions as it relates to household allocation of food because they frequently are not involved in the formal acquisition of income. They're much more involved in informal acquisition of income. And because of this, they are not allowed many times to decide how the income is spent in regards to family nutrition. And this is a very serious issue because there's been a lot of research done to indicate that the men won't always spend the money on quality food for the family, whereas women do. It's also important to understand that women have different time constraints in their environments, particularly associated with what we call reproductive, productive, and community activities. Reproductive focusing predominantly on domestic activities associated with childbearing, pregnancy, household management activities. Productive on some income generation opportunities that they may have, and community associated with taking care of sick people, doing things associated with their schools, churches, etc., etc. And these time constraints influence very strongly their ability to not only consume and produce high quality food, but their overall health. So this is a little background as to why these topics are important. I actually focused on, when I was in Latin America, particularly in Ecuador, looking at issues around malnutrition. And when I say malnutrition, I'm not only talking about lack of calories and lack of quality and quantity of food, but also the opposite, which is now being considered associated with obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and overconsumption of calories. So if we look at particularly youth, and we're doing this in the work that we were doing in Ecuador, approximately 20% of youth, 42.5 million youth, 0 to 19 years of age, are overweight or obese. And there's many, many reasons for this. We also have another issue associated with stunting, which means their height for age is not normal. And this is very common in young children under 60 months of age. And in Ecuador, we are looking at issues particularly of obesity and how we can begin to address this not only in the schools, but also looking at ways to change people's perceptions of their diet and what is considered to be healthy eating. So we focused on this pretty heavily when I was in Ecuador in 2022. One of the other things that is really important to consider, aside from these two prongs of malnutrition, is to really look at the issues related to this on particularly rural women. And we focus very heavily on indigenous rural women because they are particularly subject to some of this increasing shift towards overnutrition. And there's a lot of reasons why this is occurring in different countries, particularly low and middle income. And frequently it is associated with the outmigration of the males, and then the woman is responsible for all the activities associated not only with that she was doing previously, but also that she now has acquired because the male has outmigrated. And what this does is it affects their ability to produce traditional foods, which then encourages the consumption of overly processed foods, and there we have then the increase in obesity, diabetes, etc., etc. So the work that I was doing in Ecuador in 2022 was really looking at these issues and how can we begin to address these, particularly as it relates to indigenous women. So my Fulbright project focused on, number one, identifying local partners in Ecuador who not only were interested in this intersection between nutrition and gender, but were already doing work in this area. And one of the organizations I had already done some work with, because I used to work with the CGIAR, the Consultative Group for International Ag Research, is the Centro Internacional de la Papa, CIP, which is also known as the International Center for Potatoes. And they actually are based all over the world, but they have headquarters in Quito, Ecuador. And I was good friends with the director, which was helpful. I also was working with the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences, also known as FLACSO, which is a university based in Quito. And I have colleagues there that were doing work on particularly looking at issues related to obesity and heart disease related to consumption of processed foods. And so they were very interested in putting a gender lens onto this, which is what my Fulbright project really focused on, because they did not have this kind of information, and they were really interested in training their students and researchers on beginning to incorporate a gender lens into the research that they were already doing. Okay, so one of the things that I did was develop a bunch of training materials and provide training not only to the faculty, but to the graduate students, as well as some of the nonprofit organizations and SIP while I was in Ecuador. And so I had the opportunity to do a lot of participatory workshops, which is one of the things I love doing. And we do lots of different hands-on activities, as you can see here with some of the students. But the whole idea is to really look at the kind of research that these students are doing and how can we actually integrate gender into this, particularly from a nutrition perspective, and how can that make a difference in the outcomes based on their research. I then had the opportunity to take a look at a number of the graduate student research proposals and to help them to look at ways to more actively integrate gender, which hopefully will be a very productive outcome. And then I also worked on 2 different research projects that FLACSO had ongoing that were funded by the Canadians. And these were projects that, again, were looking at issues associated with overconsumption of highly processed foods and how can we begin to shift diets to consuming more healthy types of foods. So that was kind of a fun thing. One of the fantastic things that has come as a follow-up associated with my Fulbright is I'm actually working with some faculty at the University of Florida, Juan and Jeanette Andrade, who are both nutritionists, and we actually received a small mini grant to go back and look at working with FLACSO and with SIP and other organizations in both Ecuador and Peru to really look at ways that we could begin to improve school nutrition in the Andes, and particularly focusing on certain populations, particularly looking at school-aged children and adolescent females who are highly subject basically to increasing amounts of obesity and other types of long-term health consequences because of overconsumption of highly processed foods. So we have been doing some work on this and are currently looking at other opportunities for grants so that we can go back into Ecuador and Peru and then potentially add some other South American countries to really look at ways that we can improve health and nutrition for these particular target populations. It's a big challenge because it's not unique to Ecuador. This is happening all over the world. So we're looking at ways that we can potentially scale up findings that we might have and move this forward. We actually had the opportunity to conduct 2 different seminars when we were down there, and this was actually last summer, one in Ecuador and Quito, and one also in Lima, Peru. And we had organizations from all over both countries that participated and were very interested in, again, sharing their research findings, as well as looking at ways that we can improve the diet in these 2 countries in particular, but then also potentially expand this to other countries in the world. So that was a very gratifying opportunity. Some of the barriers that we discovered associated with both countries, there was a little bit of overlap, which was interesting. But to really look at how can we improve diversity in diet, how can we look at ways that water, which was a significant issue in both countries, can be improved, and how can we reduce the migration, particularly of youth, out of the countries and find opportunities for sustainable livelihoods for these folks. So those were areas that we tackled and came up with some potential solutions. One of the other opportunities that we had was to go visit the Ecuadorian embassy in Peru. We actually got to meet with the ambassador, which was pretty exciting. So I had to take that picture there with the Andrades and with Trent Blair, who's in the center, who is actually now the director for SIP in Ecuador, former UF graduate, and actually was a UF faculty member for a short period of time. So that was a kind of a meaningful opportunity. But our next steps is we're basically looking at opportunities right now, potentially applying for a large grant that will allow us to go back into these countries to address these nutritional issues. But it was really thanks to Fulbright that got the ball rolling for me, which was a real pleasure. So I'm very thankful for that. And I should just mention that this painting here is from one of the most famous artists in Ecuador, Oswaldo Guayasamín, and they have a gallery dedicated to him in Quito, which is absolutely fabulous. So I don't know, Ed, if I'm on time or over time, but thank you very much.
It's not okay. Sorry. Okay. It's not so much the amount of time, but what you're doing with the time, and this is just absolutely fascinating, topic, and the worth of it is just amazing. I have my chat room open if anybody has any questions. If you don't, I certainly do. One of the things that you had mentioned that there's high incidence of obesity. And I would think, especially with my trip to Guatemala, Southwest Guatemala, 10 years ago, when people working these cooperative coffee farms, I didn't see an awful lot of obesity, because they all lived on the farm, they ate traditional foods, there were hardly any fast food outlets, there weren't any cities there. But now you're telling me that even a lot of the rural youth, simply because of the out-migration, they have to rely on less local foods. That was very surprising.
Yeah, it's really tragic. I mean, what you will see in a lot of these rural communities now is an increasing amount of, again, highly processed, unhealthy foods, a lot of soda consumption, which is very, very high in sugar. And so they're seeing increasing amounts of, as I say, not only obesity, but heart disease, diabetes, and many times these maladies are not addressed because there are no medical services available. And so we are really looking at ways that we can encourage people to go back to either consuming more of the traditional foods, which were healthier for folks, or finding ways that we can help to alleviate some of the excessive work that these women are picking up as the men out migrate. So we're seeing this not only in Ecuador, but all over the world. So it's a significant problem.
Again, my trip to Guatemala, for 10 days, we ate nothing but tamales, corn cakes, a lot of coffee, obviously. But, I'm not there to eat fast food and stuff. But you're telling me that over the past, 10 years or dozen years, this generation is really
shifted, particularly in urban areas. The urban areas are really, really significantly impacted.
Yeah. I'm very pleased to hear that your experience resulted in a post-Fulbright mini grant to conduct this work.
Yeah, we actually were funded through the Global Food Systems Institute at the University of Florida because there's real interest in ways that we can begin to increase our exposure in Latin America, because we've done a tremendous amount of work in Sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. But now with obviously all the cuts that are going on associated with funding through USAID, et cetera, we're really looking at other opportunities for funding sources as well as other geographic locations. And so there's real interest in going back to work in Latin America.
Very good. Any other questions from people? I do have one more, but I don't want to hog the Q&A. How much does media play now that people have cable and satellite in some of these rural areas? For instance, about 10 years ago, the New York Times had a big article on how Brazilian body images were changing. Used to be they liked a fuller body, but as a result of seeing our Western models on television, they're now beginning to diet, use anorexia and bulimic methods to achieve a so-called different body type than the one they traditional. Do you see this?
Well, Yeah, the population that I generally work with, Ed, is again rural. It's low SES. They don't have access to a lot of those different media sources. If they have a cell phone that works, that's kind of amazing. Um, I don't do a lot of work in urban areas where I'm sure those kinds of media influences are prevalent. But I don't, and I don't, as I say, the kind of work that I do, we don't generally associate with folks that are, consumed with body image. But I'm sure that probably is an issue, with certain populations for
Yeah.
certain.
Again, my point, even places as far flung as Nepal and Tibet, I've been to Nepal, they have access to videos and satellite TV, and they're wearing American t-shirts, and they're wanting all the beauty aids and everything. And I'm sure those fast food commercials, you know,
Media is very, very important in urban areas, no question about that.
yeah, great. Well, thanks so much. If there are
Most
no, I'm going to
welcome.
check the chat room once more. I Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Colverson. We really appreciate, and you can see some people are giving those little avatars there, the hand clapping. So uh, please enjoy our appreciation for a very important topic. Uh, with that, our final speaker today is Fevi Rose Paro. She is a third-year PhD student from the Philippines in our public health and environmental health track. Her previous work was in water, sanitation, and hygiene, and this Fulbright experience involves understanding the social dynamics and environmental factors in maternal and child health in landlocked and island low and middle income countries. The hope is to provide guidance in improving public health in these areas, which is a very, very fine effort. Fevi, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ed. Let me share my screen. Uh-huh. Hope you can see it. Perfect. All right. Magandang buhay, everyone. Hello, and thank you all for having us. Today, I will be sharing the highlights of our research on health and nutrition in geographically isolated low and middle income countries and how Fulbright has served as a vehicle to this project. So briefly about me, I was born and raised in rural town of the province of Albay in the Philippines, and I grew up seeing the beauty of the nature in province as well as the development challenges that it entail. And being a homegrown Bicolana, I understand the burden of inaccessibility to good health services, quality education, adequate housing, and even basic infrastructures for safe and water and sanitation. And this lived experience has led me to doing research and advocacy work to improving quality of life in our marginalized communities. So how did I get here? I pursued profession in human settlements planning and environmental health in the University of the Philippines. And in 2022, I was fortunate to receive the Fulbright SHED PhD scholarship and continue to work in public health in the University of Florida. Prior to my PhD, I engaged in various research and extension projects back home, and I did my master's thesis in one of our islands to understand how variations of access to water and sanitation in hygiene facilities impact diarrheal infections in upland, lowland, and coastal communities. I've also been involved in studies about women, children, and community health in geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas, or what we call as GDAS in the Philippines, which heightened my interest in maternal and health and nutrition, particularly in remote locations. So for my um, PhD research were focused on geographically isolated LMICs. Why geographically isolated LMICs? We believe that these are important areas of interest because geographically isolated LMICs can either be landlocked or ocean-locked developing countries. And landlocked and island LMICs have varying economic and environmental challenges. Landlocked, for instance, lack the access to the sea, while the islands are surrounded by water, making both regions remote from the rest of the world. And geographic isolation or remoteness can exacerbate inherent challenges in LMICs, such as access to health and nutrition services. So for this research project, I'm looking at the seasonal, spatial, and sociocultural context of maternal health and nutrition in landlocked versus island LMICs. We wanted to look at the impact of exposure to wet and dry seasons, and distance to facilities and health services and how it affects pregnancy outcomes. We are also interested in understanding local innovations for health service delivery in these geographically disadvantaged areas. You might be wondering, why are we doing this? Why is this important? Well, we believe that understanding similarities and differences in landlocked and island communities will allow various sectors to distinguish the needs, the priorities, and of course, the opportunities in each environment. Now, let's talk about what we've done so far and the highlights of my pre-dissertation project experience in Rwanda. This exploratory research pre-dissertation research is part of the bigger DUSHOF project, which is a randomized control trial headed by my supervisor, Dr. Sarah McCune. The project was funded by USAID through the Feed the Future's Livestock Systems Innovation Lab. DUSHOF means 2 eggs, and the main objective basically is to test the effects of egg consumption during pregnancy on child growth and development in Rwanda. But my role in this project is to identify social and spatial factors that may influence maternal health and nutrition outcomes aside from that of the food intervention trial. So this is the map of Rwanda and Nyagatare, which is our study site. Rwanda is a landlocked country situated in Central Africa, bordered to the north by Uganda, in the east by Tanzania, south by Burundi, and the west by Democratic Republic of Congo. So this is the first part. You see, we have landlocked versus island LMICs. The first part of the research is the landlocked area, which is represented by Rwanda. So I went to Rwanda last summer 2024 through the Center for African Studies pre-dissertation research grant and the support from the McCune Lab. I met with collaborators from the University of Rwanda and the World Vision Rwanda, and Fulbright has been crucial in facilitating this travel and visa renewal during this trip. I stayed in Nyagatare for the site reconnaissance. I think I stayed about 10 days in the area. We did visit around the area, and we identified areas of interest such as residential areas. You see here this typical housing in the Nyagatare, farms and markets. And of course, I always share this in my presentation. The best part of the field work is seeing wildlife in Africa. And it was my first time seeing zebra. And so I always include this in my presentations, and I'm really thankful for Fulbright for paving the way from Asia to America and now to Africa. So bulk of my time in Rwanda was dedicated to data collection, of course, and community immersion. And I went to the field to map locations of the research impact areas from the DUSHOF project, if you remember, and locate critical point facilities such as drinking water sources. We geotagged the participant's house and collected coordinates or data points for accessibility analysis later, which is part of the research that we're doing. And one of the striking observations that we had, which I wanted to share with you, is that from our fieldwork, there's approximately 30% of the participants reporting unsafe water sources at the time of the survey. When we say unsafe water sources, these are open water sources or even groundwater sources that are unprotected from contamination. And this is how water access looks like in the community that we work with. These are actual photos from the field, and some community members get their water from rivers or streams, while others use hand pumps or public taps. But the quality and the quantity of water is a major concern in the area. And if we are talking about health and nutrition, this is a major concern because water, which is a basic right and need, has a major impact in these situations. Okay. Now, what are the next steps for us? Well, number one is to look for new research funding. As I have mentioned, this project has been funded by USAID, and we all know about the USAID funding concerns. And second, we wanted to work with whatever DUSHOF data we have and analyze the data using the TRIAS framework that I showed, and then continued data collection and community immersion in the Philippines for the island part of the research. So this is going to be a comparative assessment between a landlocked versus an island community. So the work has just started. This is a work in progress, and I'm just sharing the highlights, and hopefully we could continue the work. Oops. I just wanted to acknowledge Fulbright, of course, Fulbright Philippines, Center for African Studies, the McCune Lab, and my Rwanda fieldwork partners, James and Emmanuel, for making this possible. Maraming salamat po, Morakusi. Thank you very much. And let me know if you have questions.
Wow. Terrific stuff. Does anybody have? I'm looking in the chat room there. If you don't have questions, I certainly do. But I'll give you all a few seconds to go in. But very, very interesting work. And again, the photos of people using those water sources. We take this for granted and all. How effective do you feel you were? You've had a couple of years now to kind of look at the longitudinal effects of this.
I personally feel devastated when I saw that little boy getting water from that. You've seen the picture. It says a lot of things, and I don't have to explain anything about it. And I thought, because I was saying I lived and I grew up in rural and remote areas, and I thought we're having the worst situation, and yet I'm seeing this, and it's really challenging and at the same time motivating to do more work and how to improve and help these communities that we partner with. So yeah, it's really a big call for everyone to make sense of these pictures. I personally picked those so that it could encourage more to save water, do more work about conservation efforts.
Yeah, I will say that my parents worked in Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya in the early 1970s. My dad was an ophthalmologist. My mom was a physical therapist. And they started working on cleaning up some of the river systems. They have these particular flies and mosquitoes that feed off of the refuse. And that goes and bites the older people and the baby's eyes. That's called river blindness disease. But I'm pleased to say that 20 years later, we're on the verge of getting rid of those kinds of things. So, hopefully in our generation. Do you think the fact that the Philippines is so isolated, what do you have, 1,800 islands, or is that Indonesia? But the point is you've got so many.
We have 7,000 more.
7,000 more. Okay. Do you believe that the government is improving the infrastructure to help, specifically with transport, clean water systems? Do you see any effort towards that?
I think I could say I could speak for the communities that I've worked with, and I went to one of the islands in Mindoro, and that's where I conducted my master's thesis. And during that time, I think it was 2017 or 2018, and we've seen efforts from the local government to provide water and sanitation in the area. So there have been efforts like providing toilets and even public tops. So I think infrastructure-wise, they're doing it. And the only concern that I could remember from that experience is that the acceptability from the community themselves, because sometimes the efforts that are being provided in the area are based on how we wanted it to look like, but the community were not really consulted and asked about what they need and how they would want it to look like from their own side. So I hope that makes sense. But yeah, the Philippines is working on it. We've been improving network connectivities as far as the islands are concerned. There are efforts in creating bridges from islands to islands, but of course, there's still more work to do.
Yeah, you bet. One of the things I liked about my service in Malaysia, I was a Peace Corps volunteer there, a lecturer, and finally a Fulbrighter, is the concept of the Gotong Royong. It's a community-based volunteer effort, and I've participated in about a half a dozen of them, whether they're cleaning up a river or helping someone, with their housing and all. It's just wonderful. The government promotes it, but the local people do that, especially if you can't depend on your government and all. And it happens through Malaysia and Indonesia. Do you think are the Philippines, or certainly your work in Africa. Are people beginning to use virtual meetings to reduce that physical distance? I mean, look what we're doing here. We have about 40 people sharing information very easily. Philippines and your work in Africa, are they beginning to use virtual meetings to spread this information?
Definitely, yes. All over the world, we've been using technologies to assist us with this kind of information dissemination. And with my work in the Philippines, we've been communicating through social media as well. And we've been using these platforms to relay the information to the area. And we've been conducting meetings as well. But in remote and rural communities, it's still challenging because, it would require electricity, connectivity, and sometimes the infrastructures could not support those systems to work. So we still balance it out by including physical and in-person meetings with technological advances.
Yeah, what we take for granted. I mean, I was conducting a Zoom meeting on my iPhone in my backyard, but for people in the rural areas that don't have strong Wi-Fi or cell phone signals and all, that's really very, very difficult. Are there any questions from the rakyat? Rakyat means citizenry. It's an Indonesian, Malaysian word, and I like that. The rakyat. No. Kathy, we have one question left over from the Q&A. It got in after Fevi started, but I was wondering if you would address, other than sodas, what other types of food cause these kinds of obesity problems?
Yeah, I actually texted Anna privately, but yeah, correct. Anything that is highly processed, that comes in a sealed plastic bag, such as potato chips, you name it, cookies. Basically, they suggest that the best way to shop in any store, including the United States, is to shop around the perimeter of the store where the fresh foods are.
Yeah.
And everything in the center aisles is usually highly processed. So I always suggest that to people when they're shopping, is to think about, where do you spend most of your time? And so when we look at the stores, because I did an entire training on this for some youth in Ecuador, is where do you spend your time when you're shopping? And how do you purchase foods, and what kinds of fresh foods are you purchasing, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, Ann and I had a little exchange.
Okay, good. But I wanted the rest of the group to understand that as well. And thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
If there are no other questions, as we close out my Fulbright in 7 minutes for this year, we've heard from 3 Fulbrighters involved with improving equity in household nutrition in Ecuador, improving sustainability efforts in Indonesian construction industry, and helping improve public health in maternal and child health. These are all extremely noble goals, and we thank you for your service for this. A reminder